All right, the lineup is back, and my, we have a lot to get into today. The fifth stop on the 2023 WSL Championship Tour season and the final stop before mid-season relegation. The Western Australia Margaret River Pro is complete, won by three-time world champion Gabriel Medina and five-time world champion Carissa Moore in impressive fashion. Exactly one-third of the men's and women's fields have been relegated to the Challenger Series, which will start next week with the Boost Mobile Pro at Snapper Rocks. The wildcards for the 2024 Championship Tour season have been allocated to 11-time world champion Kelly Slater and Brazilian style master Miguel Pupo on the men's side, and WSL Final Five combatants Joanne Defay and Brisa Hennessy on the women's side. And there were absolutely tectonic shifts in the Vissla Shaper Rankings out west. We're going to get into all of it today with my co-host for the season, the one and only Mitch Salazar. Mitch, my God, there's been a lot happening. How are you doing, man?
Hey, we've been keeping up with everything through our text thread, but what an event, Dave. We had 4 or 5 days in between the second and last day of competition up until finals day yesterday, and huge day of competition, first of all, yesterday. Big performances such as Gabe and Carissa winning the event on both the men's and women's sides. But how about Tyler Wright moving up to number 1 in the rankings too? She hasn't qualified for either of the first two Rip Curl WSL finals. She's positioning herself well. I see her doing well in the second half of the year.
Absolutely. And you mentioned our offline text thread. We've talked about that before. I've had people actually hit me up and be like, hey, if we become Patreon subscribers, can we get access to that? And I responded, I said, I don't know how that works, but I don't think there's a whole lot of daylight between what we say on the text thread and this podcast. Yeah. So I think everyone's getting the sort of the unfiltered, pure, uncut opinion from Mitch and Dave here. But you mentioned Tyler, you mentioned the Western Australia Margaret River Pro. We're going to get into it with winners and losers. Mitch, start us off. What have you got for us?
Well, my first one is a pick that we were talking about before the event started. He had his back up against the wall, did not make the cut as I had initially predicted. It's Kelly Slater. And the only reason I really picked Kelly is because I just think that not only was there spark in the first heat that he served, we really owe Kelly a significant amount of what we do with the overlapping heat format, with him having, segued it into competitive surfing. And that format didn't work out for him at Margaret River when he actually competed in it. There were times where I saw flashes of brilliance, where I thought we were going to see somebody determined to make the cut, make it all the way to the final and win the event. I didn't see it. News comes out, he gets the wild card for 2023, the back end, 2024, the first 5 events. I understand it. I'm not super happy about it, but he is deserving. He's the 11-time world champion. But I just don't think that this was a valuable performance enough when you consider what Ramsey Bukiam has done and what Miguel Pupo, the other men's wild card, was been able to do over the course of the last few years. So, Kelly's my first thought, Dave. What about you?
Coming out with the heat. It's funny because I think our last podcast, you thought, no, there's no way he's going to make the cut. I was kind of there with you, but I did say, hey, look, this man has sailed beyond the horizon of human achievement. Who knows? Mm-hmm. And he looked okay, I think, in his opening round heat, and then he got a little bit wobbly. But, my first loser from out west, the American men. They got absolutely packed up this season. Kelly Slater, Nat Young, Jake Marshall, and Kolohe Andino all relegated to the Challenger Series. Kelly, as we've just discussed, he's been allocated the WSL wildcard by Tours and Competition. And he and Griffin Colapinto are the sole American males on the championship tour moving forward. Now, before people start throwing their imperial flags around, remember the WSL considers Hawaii a sovereign surfing nation, and rightfully so. So we're not here to talk about John, Barron, Seth, or Ian. Good for the surfers from Hawaii. The male surfers from America, however, it was a rough year. And for a country that in some cases can, and in some cases probably should, have a lot of advantages, it's a hard hang. There's a massive industry presence in America, lots of financial support early on, a heritage of great competitors, but I don't know exactly what it is, but I may put the theory culprit primarily on 2 factors. The first being the relative lack of like strong state and nationally supported domestic competitive series, the likes of which you see in Australia and Brazil, and they're just producing, world beaters repeatedly. And the second piece is related to that industry presence and lots of money early on, a lot of comfort early on, not necessarily for performance or results. And again, that's relative to other parts of the world. Kelly, he's an outlier for obvious reasons. But that isn't to say that like Nat, Jake, and Kolohe are not good surfers or even very motivated competitors. They absolutely are. And I think their results don't reflect their potential, but something is definitely amiss in American male surfing. And we're going to take the L on this episode.
Just if I could back tag that a little bit, Dave, before I go into my second loser. I do a lot of work for USA Surfing. I think really our premier amateur surfing organization within the United States. I see a lot of these surfers coming up. I competed against a good bunch of them too. And I can just tell you, this is probably the best amateur organization worldwide when it comes to surfing. And that's just one of them. You have NSSA, you have Western Surfing Association, which is primarily in California. You have the HASAs and everything else in the state of Hawaii, if we're counting them included, because they come over and compete at lowers during the event in June. I just don't comprehend what has happened. I thought Nat Young was off to a great start to the year. He did well at Pipeline. He had some fantastic heats at Sunset Beach. I mean, just fantastic for a goofy footer to do well there. He just wasn't able to make the quarters or better within the first 5 events, and it cost him in terms of the rankings. Jake Marshall, same thing. He had one heat at Sunset Beach where he needed a 6, and he wasn't able to get it at the end. And when we talk about Kolohe Andino, easily the most decorated amateur surfer in the world, in the history of surfing. Not even Kelly is able to touch him. I can't get my head around it. It's so incomprehensible. But I just think that there needs to be a bigger fire within their hearts in order to make that cut. If you look at the Brazilians, if you look at the Australian contingent that's on the championship tour right now, they're willing to do whatever it takes to make it to that final and win. Like what Lob did in the last 2 events. He needed 2 results. He went out there, smoked Kelly. He said, hey, Kelly, your time's done. It's my time now. Connor O'Leary's within the top 10 again this year. Ryan Callanan's back to where he should be. I think this is an era where men's surfing within the United States might need to flourish because the women are coming up. You have Caitlin Simmers, Courtney Conlogue, who just bowed out, still a great surfer within the last 12 to 15 years, I would say, for the United States. So I think it's really going to have to rely, within the women within the U.S. to do well.
Totally. And I mean, America is a pretty politically polarized place in 2023. But I think one thing that brings everyone together is ego, and so if the ego has been bruised, it's like you look at places like Brazil and Australia, you have cities and states and local governments like begging and requesting and funding these events above the amateur level, right? And in America, you don't have that. Often it's sort of the opposite. And I think that's got to change before the Americans can kind of really challenge the Australians and the Brazilians. But we'll see what happens. Who's your next loser, Mitch?
So my second loser is actually one of the female surfers that I thought was going to have a great shot of winning again here at Margaret River. It's last year's champion, Isabella Nichols. Misses out from the cut, first of all, after a runner-up finish at Bells Beach. I thought conditions were really good, suited her style, and unfortunately, she just wasn't able to find consistency within the event. Made it out of the elimination round, but once that happened, she wasn't even able to make it to the quarter. So big loss for the championship tour, I feel. I think she's going to do well at the first 2 events of the Challenger Series, both Snapper Rocks and at Sydney. But a huge loss, I feel, for female surfing on the championship tour, Dave.
For sure. She was definitely on my fantasy team. I thought she was going to pull it out. Great surfer, super smart. And I do think she's one of those surfers that's going to thrive on the Challenger Series and come back even stronger. My second loser from West Oz is actually the Channel Islands surfboard team. They probably suffered the biggest percentage hit of the top tier board programs with the midseason relegation, losing half their team in Nat Young, Jackson Baker, and Maxime Husino. All great surfers. We talked about it. Nat and Jackson had moments of brilliance this season and fell just shy of the results they needed. Maxime is an excellent surfer as well, but as a rookie, kind of got behind the 8 ball early in the year and kept drawing really difficult opponents. And on paper, they're down to just 3 surfers for the back half of the season in Lakey Peterson, Matthew McGillivray, and Zhao Xianka. Lakey, I think, is surfing better than I've ever seen her surf. I wouldn't be surprised to see her rally and make the final 5 come September. Matt is so solid and so stylish. He really could disrupt things. And Zhao's the current rankings leader. So there is a lot to be happy with here. And if the rumor mill is to be believed, a number of surfers still left on the CT have been looking at Channel Islands boards and getting a few to try out. So their ranks may swell here in the upcoming events. But in terms of staying competitive against the likes of DHD, Mayhem, and Sharpeye, 3 surfers at the moment could be a challenge for them moving forward.
That's a great pick. I really like it because I think everybody's really involved with the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings. I actually got a text from Greg Fernandez from Dark Art Surf a few weeks ago. He's like, hey, I want you to try a board out. I'm really stoked about what you guys are doing with the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings. So I think I'm going to try out a Dark Arts board, Dave, for the first time ever.
Hey, it'd be rude not to.
Hey, I'm willing to do anything I can to improve surfing, you know? Let's go to my third loser, though. And this is a really real heartbreaking story. And I don't think it comes to a surprise why I have him in here. It's Ramsey Bukim. Somebody that I've been able to see for the last 10 years, grinded on the qualifying series. We finally have the challengers the last 2 years. Doesn't make the cut in 2021, qualifies in 2022. I was there in Brazil when he made the final against Gabe. Ended up losing. He could have clinched the spot right there. Didn't matter. He clinched it at Haleiwa just by surfing in the event. He gets here, I think it's the day before Pipe starts. He says, hey, I have an injury. I'm not going to be able to surf either here or at Sunset Beach. I say, okay, you still have 3 events to make up for it. If not, you'll probably get the injury wildcard in the back end of the year. And I know you'll explain this later on how we select wildcards and whatnot. We have the same thing that happened to Lob last year, Dave, where he wasn't able to surf a single event before the cut happened, and now he's relegated to the Challenger Series, where he might not even be able to surf in the first 2 events in Australia either. So what are these kids' options? I don't know. And it's a heartbreaking story because he grinded for 10 years on the QS and then on the Challenger Series, finally made it, and he hasn't even been able to surf a CT event as an actual CT surfer.
Yeah, I had something similar, but just to back tag your Ramsey point, so disappointing. He forever has, in my opinion, been an elite CT level surfer. He's so fast. He's so powerful. It got great backhand and forehand, great tube rider. I'm not sure where he's at in his injury rehab right now. I don't know if he's ready to go tomorrow. I don't know if he needs another 6 months, but we'll get into it a little later. I do think there are probably mechanisms for him to exist as a first replacement surfer or to come in as a wild card under tours and competition just to give him the opportunity, because to your point, he might not even be ready to go on the Challenger Series like Lob had to. So we'll see what happens with Ramsey. I think first things first is just to wait for him to get 100% and then to make that assessment. But yeah, that's pretty related to my third loser, which is just diversity on the tour. You know, we lost Ramsey, who represented Morocco, Carlos, who represented Costa Rica. We still have Brissa on the women's side, and Maxime, who represented France. We have Joanne on the women's side too. But that's nothing new. You know, since time immemorial, there's been a concentration of surfing power across just a few countries. But I would love to see these emerging countries bolster their numbers and really make a run at the title in the future. And I think we will see it. But yeah, it's a bummer to kind of see them get shaved off at midseason relegation. But, you know, shifting tone a little bit, Mitch, who's your first winner from out west?
Well, first winner has to be the women's champion, Carissa Moore. Huge victory for her. I love the way she was able to surf. And I thought she defeated a lot of these women handedly. She had a big come from behind wind. I think it was in the quarterfinals, right? When she got that one barrel literally in the last minute, came back, got a 9. It was sick to see. And I love that she came out with the win. She's currently number 2 in the rankings. I really like her spot right there. She doesn't have the pressure of the yellow jersey yet. I think she's probably going to get there by the end of the season, right before lowers. What I do like that I'm seeing about Carissa the most, though, Dave, are her boards. They look great at Bells. They look great at Margaret River. I expect them to be just as good, if not even better, in California at the Surf Ranch next month.
It's a really great point you made about not having the target on her. I think for someone like Carissa, the most dangerous place for her to be is in that 2, 3, 4 spot, because she doesn't have to deal with the front runner attention and responsibilities or having the target. And occasionally in the past, when she's been outside the top 5, it becomes kind of a write-off season for her. I think she's really threatening, though, when she's in that little mix, because she can just focus on her surfing and she's so dangerous. My first winner from the Western Australia Margaret River Pro is John Florence's performance legacy at main break. Did he win the event? No. Griffin was on point in terms of his own performance and competition and got John in the semis. However, John's track record in Western Australia is pretty much unmatched. It's kind of like Mick Fanning at Bells or Kelly Slater at Pipe during their respective peaks. And John he's redefined the way people surf Margaret River. And despite existing in a field of the best surfers on the planet, his performances when he's on are still light years ahead of everyone. And the interesting thing I think about John, having grown up in the surfing limelight and achieved a lot at a young age, both competitively and financially through endorsement deals, is that I really think his motivation on tour these days comes from something pretty deep within him. He views the CT as a personal challenge. And he's been pretty open about wanting to know what he has inside of him, when it comes to performing against the best surfers on the planet in the live arena. And that's the kind of thing that gets him out of bed in the morning. That gets a singlet on him. However, at main break, when there is swell, I feel like there's an even extra layer to John surfing when he sees a big wave canvas with lots of power, only one other person in the lineup, and he thinks to himself, I wonder how hard I can push my own surfing out here. He has this very unique ocean knowledge. He has a special approach to powerful waves. He has the physicality. He has the equipment. And what we're seeing from him in heats year over year out there is him asking the question of himself that no one else can ask, which is like, how hard can a human being surf? And it really is like, I know people kind of gush over it. I'm gushing over it right now, but like, it really is a radical thing within the broader product of professional surfing, where it's like, here's this person who's been put in these unique conditions and is really pushing what we thought was possible.
100%. I think that's an incredible pick. I would say when it comes to a specific location, whether 30, 40 years ago or modern day, this probably has to be the most dominant performance in the history of the championship tour. I mean, he has close to 50 excellent scores in less than 10 years of this event being run there. He's won 2 times, and out of those 2 times, he's also had 2 world championships within that same span. I would have to say, out of somebody making those heats in excellent form, like he's done, I think around 20 times in those 6 or 7 years that we've had the event back at Margaret River, this is the one person that I would say, okay, watch out, despite Griffin beating him in the semifinals, even if he's comboed, which he was at the end, that doesn't guarantee that you're making it out alive. And I really want to point out something out of the heat within the semifinal of John and Griffin. There was a point where there could have been a block situation right there. Priority wasn't switched. It really changed the course of the heat right there, because John was clearly out in front. Griffin might have blocked him, he might have not, but that allowed Griffin to really get that 1-8 at the beginning, and then he eventually got in rhythm for the 9. So things could have played out differently, but I still really like John's ranking right now. He's within that top 5, top 10 picture too. He might qualify for lowers. I hope he does.
I like it.
Okay.
Who's your next winner, Mitch?
Winner number 1. No surprise right here. 3-time world champ Gabe Medina winning for the first time ever at the Western Australia Margaret River Pro. Huge win, first of all, for the goofy footers. It's been a long time since we've seen a goofy footer for the men come out on top right here. I remember Ryan Callanan's 9.93 a few years ago when it was huge. It really reminded me of the 9.5 that we saw from Gabe in the final right there. Very impressive performance, and he peaked at the right time too. I didn't think he really had one great heat up until he made it to the final. He was kind of grinding through a lot of those heats, especially the ones against the 2 Brazilians, Joao in the semifinal, and then Felipe in the quarter. He peaked right in time, though, besting Griffin Colapinto, who is also within the top 5 right now in the final day. But I loved his surfing.
Man, it's a great pick. And I know you and I are going back on text about this. Like, it was a pretty Some of those waves on finals day were ugly, man. They like huge waves, like sidewindy, like ribs in them. And I was just blown away by how Gabriel was just able to muscle out of his bottom turns, like keep his composure through these waves. I'd never really seen anything like it. Yeah. It's a great pick, and it relates actually to my second choice on the winners from West Oz, and that's just the champions. You had 3-time world champ Gabe and 5-time world champ Carissa take out the wins. You had 2-time world champions Tyler Wright and John Florence finish second and third respectively. Reigning world champions Stephanie Gilmore and Felipe Toledo also made the quarterfinals. And what I think it was is kind of a reordering of this season's results in a way that really favored the established kind of alpha surfers on tour at the moment. It's been an interesting season in terms of emerging talent like Xiao Xianca and Jack Robinson, Molly Picklum, Katie Simmers, and others. But West Oz kind of swung the pendulum back to these proven performers. And you mentioned John's at 7 right now on the rankings. Like, it is going to be a radical race to qualify for the WSL finals in September. Just because of the people who are currently entrenched in the top 5 being that emerging class, and the people that are hunting them down being these proven performers that are starting to gain momentum. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, and just real quick before we go into our next segment, because I feel like you already mentioned her through CI Surfboards. I have to mention her too, just what she was able to do right before the mid-year cutoff. Lakey Peterson had an incredible comeback. She was so far down in the rankings. She was super far out of qualification. She's up into number 8 right now. And if she goes into her home state of California at the Surf Ranch, then goes to Central America, El Salvador, and then Brazil, which has also been a decent event for her too, she's on the run for making a qualification, to the Rip Curl WSL finals. I wouldn't be surprised. She makes the finals at lower trestles, even if she's number 5. Steph proved last year that she could still win. I like this pick, Dave. I think she's, she's talented enough to make it there.
Yeah. Well, so okay, your 3 winners, because I did 2. You did Carissa, Griffin, Gabriel. Okay, that's 3. Yeah. Got it. Yeah. So my third winner is this is not too cute of a segue, although I'm going to get accused for it. It's actually the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings. We're going to dive into it in a minute, but we've been saying all season long that all the kids are talking about it, and they are. Over at Stab, the Jake Patterson, Stace Galbraith podcast prior to Margaret River was filled with excitement and predictions around the Shaper Rankings. And, we will see there were some major moves that went down in WA amongst the world's best shapers. So yeah, big winner from Margaret River, and I am looking forward to how it evolves with the sharpened field in the back half of the season. We're going to take a quick break to get a word in from our sponsors, and when we come back, we're going to dive deep into the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings. All right, it is now time for the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings. Shaper Rankings! To remind our listeners, shapers are given points based off the performance of the surfers riding their surfboards that finish in the quarterfinals or better. It's a combined rankings, men's and women's. The higher the surfer places, the more points that shaper receives. And we are tracking the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings from Event 1 to Event 10, and we will crown a winner before September's Rip Curl WSL Finals. So, absolutely wild shifts on the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings following the conclusion of the Western Australia Margaret River Pro. For the first time this season, Darren Handley and the DHD team have taken the front-runner spot on the rankings. They've had the strongest Australian leg of any team in the rankings, collecting 5 results from both the Bells Beach event and the Margaret River event, and vaulting well ahead of the pack and previous front-runner Sharp Eye. Wild card, Bronte McCauley's third place finish, and Molly Picklum, Stephanie Gilmore, Connor O'Leary, and Ethan Ewing all getting to the quarterfinals was a really high strike rate in terms of the size of the DHD team, and they're really well positioned moving forward following the midseason cut. Mayhem continues to have strong showings at these events, moving from third to second on the back of Carissa's win and Caroline's semifinal finish and Griffin's runner-up finish. Sharp Eye, who have been on a tear the past few seasons, had their sleepiest event of the season, perhaps hobbled by the absence of Jack Robinson due to his injury, but they only collected 2 quarterfinal finishes with Felipe and Barron, which is still good, but relatively slow for them. And I'd expect to see them kind of roar back to life in the next few events. Mitch, taking all that in and what you watched throughout the course of the event, what were your observations regarding the Vissla CT Shaper rankings from West Oz?
Well, first of all, I thought you brought up an excellent point with Jack Robinson being out. That's obviously a huge loss for the Sharp Eye team and even for the local boy too. Jack, defending champion, he wasn't able to surf in the event, but he knows he has his sights on the bigger picture. I just want to touch on the fact that DHD, they've had 5 surfers through to the quarterfinals in the last 2 events. That's a huge result. I don't care if Sharp Eye has 10 surfers on the championship tour. If they don't make the quarterfinals, you're not getting any points. So the fact that DHD has had 5 surfers in the last 2 events, that's huge, especially because they've both been in Australia as well. They knew that they had to attack at the right time, at home, get a result, and they got it done. Props to them. And I think a huge performance by Bronte McCauley, 2 semifinal finishes in 2 years in a row. That's a big contribution to them. You touched on, during the winners-losers segment, Channel Islands. I'm looking at the points now, and now I understand why you're so mad, because you're right. I mean, there's a 40,000 point difference between first and fourth, where they're at now, and it's massive. If they don't get going right now, they're not going to have a chance of making number 1 at the end of the year.
It's a good point, and this is obviously our pilot year for the program. We worked with all the shapers, we worked with all the best minds we can find on developing the formula, and I think it works pretty well. Obviously, we could have counted every single result. Would have been more work for me, but that kind of becomes a participation trophy at that point, right? There was also the suggestion on the other end of just count the best result or the best 2 results, but that really kind of doesn't acknowledge the fact that some of these programs have really had hot hands. We've talked about Marcio Zuvi and Sharp Eye in the past. It's not just the size of their business. It's not just the financial opportunities they have to have a big team. Like, at some point, the world's best surfers could go to any of these teams in the top tier. They're gravitating towards a certain place because that's where the boards are getting made that they want to ride, right?
100%.
So I kind of like where we're at on just keeping it quarterfinals and better. Of course, we could change that in the future. But to your point, Sharp Eyes had the biggest team all year. They had the slowest event. They fell down a few spaces, right? DHD, CI, DHD, CI, and Mayhem are all kind of in that tier 1 space of having 6 to 10 to whatever surfers on their program. DHD had a huge strike rate, getting 5 results in the last 2 events, and they don't have the biggest team, right? So I think it goes to show that a lot can change event to event, and that brings me around to Channel Islands, which, yes, they only have 3 surfers moving forward. If those 3 surfers get results at every event, they can change their fortunes quite a lot, and it'll be interesting to see what other kind of moves get made between the programs post-relegation, because there could be some poaching, there could be some seduction bringing them over to their program, anyone's program, and we'll see how it kind of washes out before the end of the year.
Yeah, and I think it's a good time to bring up the wildcard performances too, because I think without them, a couple of teams wouldn't even be in contention for the crown right now. You look at DHD's performance right here, it really came down to Bronte McCauley making the semifinals. Huge jump in points in terms of the quarterfinal finish to a semifinal finish, and then obviously first or second. But that just incremented their lead substantially. And I think going into the Surf Ranch now after this event in Western Australia, huge chance for Team Mayhem to do some damage too, because if you look at the person that is most likely to get the wild card into that event on the men's side, last year's champion for the North American qualifying series was Crosby Colapinto. He rides Mayhem surfboards from San Clemente. On the women's side, another Mayhem surfer, Sori Lindblad, was a North America QS champion for the ladies. So I think this is a huge opportunity also for a California-owned brand to do well on their home soil and eventually add up some points going into a much tougher leg when you know that your equipment, maybe it'll work, and they usually do. These are world-class boards, the highest level stuff there is. But you go into unknown territory like South Africa with a couple of young surfers, novices, that doesn't necessarily guarantee that they're going to find out what boards they want in the first year of competing at these locations, Dave.
Right, right. Jason Stevenson, JS Surfboards, we mentioned them in the last podcast, making moves with Ryan Callinan's performance at Bells Beach. And we were kind of saying, that was one of the best surfboard programs for years and years and years at the elite level. They've been a little bit quiet, but lo and behold, we're starting to see the JS Tractor logo under the likes of Samuel Pupo and Callum Robson. Samuel has unfortunately been relegated to the Challenger Series, and Callum is still splitting his time observedly between not one, not two, but three different Gold Coast shapers in Sparrow, JS, and DHD. So interesting. Callum's kind of the prom queen as far as board builders go from the Gold Coast right now.
It's a tough decision to make too, because you have to make a commitment eventually, right? It's not like you're going to be like, oh, I'll ride, this one for this location. I understand that if you're going to the Hawaiian Islands, I don't feel like you're going to do that if you're going to several different locations in the world where you're doing high performance surfing at the world's best waves. I just don't think that's necessarily what you want. You want to have something consistent under your feet, and you want to have a relationship with one single shaper too. So I think if within the next month or two, he'll probably make a decision on that, Dave.
Yeah, it's interesting though. I was trying to think of any other surfer who's obviously Sparrow's been supporting him for a long time, and he still rides those boards frequently. But I'm trying to think of any other surfer who was riding both JS and DHD at the same time, just because those are two massive brands from the Gold Coast, and they have a bit of a healthy competition thing going on. Parco used to ride for DH, and then he switched to JS, and I'm sure there was some teething over that transition. But yeah, Callum might be the first on the CT that's holding space for both of them. I think at the same time.
Was Dean Morrison riding both of them for a while too? Was he kind of like an in-betweener as well? Like he surfed one and then surfed another?
It's a good question, but I want to say he wasn't, because I think he kind of was just straight with JS. But now that we're talking about it, I remember, Billabong had a huge investment in JS at one point, I remember, and they were pushing a lot of their team riders to ride JSs. And I remember Jack Freestone, it was sort of a big deal. He was riding JSs and then he switched to DHD, because he wanted to. I think maybe similarly with Owen Wright too, there's sort of, I guess they're both world-class shapers, and you kind of get in a rhythm personality-wise or just operationally with one or the other, and it's not too difficult to flip between the two, but it is interesting. We were talking about the mid-season relegation, and to be seen, to be determined how that will impact the Vissla CT Shaper rankings. We mentioned Channel Islands losing out on 3 of their previous 6 team riders in the mid-season relegation. Sharp Eye lost 3 of their prior 13, so they're still in pretty good shape. Mayhem lost 2. DHD only lost 1, and as we mentioned, is potentially picking Callum up in some situations. And then Stamps, Takoro, and OHP are, as of recording, off the board entirely in the back half of the season. Cabianca hit the board for the first time with Gabriel's win, which is kind of baffling on a lot of ways, because obviously Gabe's the only team rider on tour who rides Cabiancas. I was just more kind of blown away that he hadn't cracked the quarters until CT5.
Yeah. No, it's unheard of, really. I think it's
right.
I have to go back and see him until what was it, when the first time we ever had the mid-year cutoff, he qualified in the back end of 2011. So that year will count, and then 2012 onwards. Since then, I don't think he's had as slow as a start as he's had this year, but obviously he's coming off with a win. So this obviously impacts a lot in terms of the rankings. But I also want to give a big shout.
Well, just real quick, the back end of 2011, when he came on, he won France and San Francisco. He won 2 out of his first 5 CT events.
Well, you're right. Well, the kid's a unicorn, though. We're talking about maybe
is crazy for sure.
One of the greatest surfers of all time. I just want to touch on Channel Islands again. Hey, Brent Power, Britt Merrick, love you guys very much. You guys shape me happy every day. I love it. Thank you guys. But they did lose 3 surfers. They only had 5 to begin with. So they lose 3 surfers. They only have 2 now, 1 on each side. Joao Shianka on the men's side and Lakey Peterson on the women's side. Kind of a devastating loss when you take into consideration that Mayhem has a much larger team, DHD has a much larger team, and obviously Sharp Eye has the biggest team out of all of them.
If you had to, and we know nothing, if you had to dreamcast, let's just say, one surfer from the Sharp Eye program to join the Channel Islands team in the back half of the year, who do you think it would, should, could be.
So that they stayed on the championship tour too, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
just a healthy, like, you know what? Thank you very much, Marcio and Yufu and Brendan and team. I'm going to go over here.
By the way, I seriously doubt anything like that's ever going to happen. I'd say Rio Waida. I think because he has the pressure taken off of him of making the cut first of all. Everybody's saying that he's going to be the rookie of the year this year, but I think Yin Gentile is kind of a sleeper pick for that too. I think Rio Waida would be a good choice for Channel Island surfboards. I think he's an up-and-coming surfer. If you look at the back end of the year, the Surf Ranch was probably going to be a good event for him. He's not super tall in stature. He fits in the barrel super well right there. It's a high-performance wave. We go to Punta Roca. Great wave for him. Has a lot of similarities to Karamas. Nice beach break in Rio and Brazil and Saquarema. And then obviously we go to Jeffreys Bay, South Africa, which is an incredible wave for him. I think it's really going to suit his style. And I think the formatting of the back end of the year suits him a lot more than the beginning of the year too. When you get to the Challenger Series and you've been so successful as he's been, when you make those man-on-man heats, you get used to that format. You get used to administering your time and being able to settle in those 30 to 40 minute heats rather than surfing a 3 to 4 person heat. I think that's what he's really looking forward to. So I think Rio Waida would be a good choice for CI surfboards.
It's a great choice. I'm just looking at their roster right now. Felipe Toledo, probably not. Jack Robinson, probably not. Kanoe Igarashi, that'd be kind of like a prodigal son situation, so I doubt it. You know, Miguel's kind of like an OG Sharp Eye guy in a lot of ways, so I can't see that. I really like your choice with Rio. Seth just moved there. I don't think Joanne and Tatiana are going to move. I like Rio, but also just for point of difference, like I don't mind the idea of Barron and Ian. You know, I think they're really good surfers. I think they can kind of fill a void as well. Again, I this is pure speculation. It's they may be really, really happy with Sharp Eye. It's obviously worked for them very well. But just in terms of leveling out that tier 1 competition in the Vissla CT Shaper rankings in the back half, it'd be interesting to see if they made some moves like that, because Mayhem, it looks like they have 5 moving forward. DHD has 5, 6. Sharp Eye's got a big team. Channel Islands at 3. It's going, as we said, it's going to be hard for them to hang in there if they can't kind of bolster a number. But we will see what happens. You know, before we close out this segment, Mitch, any other observations on the surfboard front for you?
You know, I think it's a close battle between first and second now in terms of the combined rankings, because obviously there's a huge separation for the men. First and second, Sharp Eye is way out in front. I think on the women's side, there was a huge gain by DHD, and that's why they're in first now.
Yep.
I want to point out that Mayhem, I just think they have a good chance of finishing well within the second half of the season. I just really like their choices of boards for the Surf Ranch. They've obviously been very successful in Brazil with both Carissa and who else am I thinking of that's done super well over there too on the men's
Caroline.
side?
Caroline's done really. Oh, I think Caroline Marks is what I was thinking.
Well, Caroline for sure. I mean, she could easily win the event. Yago Dora. Why was I blanking right there? Because
oh yeah, great one.
Yeah, Yago's been ripping lately. He's kind of a silent assassin, and he could easily be a pick making it to the Rip Curl WSL finals in September too. I think the back end of the year suits them more than the beginning of the year, if I'm honest. Pipe, Sunset. Not necessarily waves where I'd be thinking, okay, Mayhem, this board's going to work right here. Bells, Margies, I'm like, oh, okay. Super Tools, I could see it because it's a good beach break. You surf a lot of those things in California. Back into the year, though, a lot of point breaks that are closer to home. And then you go to J-Bay where you've had success with Caroline and Carissa before. Count me in. I like it.
It's a great point, and we can probably post this on the lineup social too, because the Vissla CT Shaper ranking, it's a combined men's and women's ranking. But as you pointed out, some of these teams do better on the men's side, and some of them do better on the women's side. And on the men's side right now, Sharp Eye's out front, followed by Channel Islands, then DHD, Mayhem, and Paizel. And then on the women's side, you've got DHD out front, but just a sliver ahead of Mayhem, Pizel, Sharp Eye, and then TNC Surf. So it is a different kind of mix, and these rankings kind of take into totality, like, how does the entire team perform, right? So it'll be really interesting to see how that kicks off with the sharpened field up at the Surf Ranch Pro presented by 805 Beer. That is it for the Vissla CT Shaper Ranking segment. We're going to take one more break to get a word in from our sponsors, and when we come back, we will answer listener questions.
All right, welcome back, everybody, to the lineup. I'm Mitch, that's Dave, and we're going into our final segment, maybe the most fun out of all three, the Instagram fan questions. Thanks, everybody, for writing to @TheLineupPod. Remember, if we don't answer your question in today's episode, we'll do our best to respond in our DMs later, as we always do. So, Dave, let's start off with our first question. This is from @Flavio.Camalier. Great question to start things off, and I think we both have an opinion on this. Should Kelly have a lifelong golden wild card to participate in any championship tour event he desires?
The question of the hour, I think. I mean, first things first, because we've got a lot of questions around Kelly's wild card and how it works. So it's probably worth reviewing how their wild cards are allocated. The WSL season wild cards, they're selected by the Tours and Competition team following applications from the athletes. The wild card selection process, it takes into account competitive performances, such as world titles, CT and Challenger Series rankings, event results, as well as medical evaluation, if applicable. So essentially, it's up to Tours and Competition to determine who gets them. Anyone can apply. In the past, it's kind of been misconstrued as like, that's an injury wild card, it's an injury wild card, but it just usually went to injured surfers because that was usually the best case. But there were the odd season where no one was really injured. Someone may have come in at the 11th hour and be like, actually, I twisted my ankle 6 events back, and that's why I've sucked, and I'd like a wild card. And they have to pass an independent medical review board anyway. So they get kind of like an untarnished view of any medical cases. And occasionally in the past, they've said, look, that doesn't pass muster. We're just going to go next down the rankings or to someone that's more deserving. Now, with regards to Kelly, who is an 11-time world champion, he applied, he got it. It really doesn't surprise me. I think he is deserving of it. But there are a couple of things, right? He's been given a wild card for the start of 2024, meaning that he can also receive wild cards in the back half of 2023, which he will. Will 2024 be his final full-time season on the championship tour? Is he going to take another full-time run in 2025 if he's able? I don't know, and I don't know if he knows, are we as surf fans going to be in a situation where he tells us ahead of time, you know what, this is my final season. I appreciate the opportunity, and here we go. I'm not sure, right? As far as the lifelong golden wild card goes, it's interesting. I'd be interested to hear his perspective on it too. Like, I would imagine that in his most honest hours, he probably thinks that he's still very, very competitive at certain venues and will be for ever. It may be like, I think he's always looking for the next kind of reference point. So like Uncle Mike Ho, like getting backdoor bombs, he's probably like, yeah, he's older than me, I can keep going, kind of thing. So, I personally don't think he should have a lifetime golden wild card to participate in any championship tour event he desires. But I think if the opportunity's there, I think at places like Chopu and Cloudbreak and Pipeline, if it works out and he's eager and he feels like he still has something left to say in a performance way, I'm for it. The other men's wild card was given to Miguel Pupo, who is deserving. I think he finished in the top 10 last season. He won Tahiti. He had a couple nights to start the season before he got hurt. But that means that Tour veteran Jadson Andre, who was also injured, and Tour rookie Ramsey Bukayem, who we've talked about, and was also injured, they miss out, and that sucks. They're both deserving, but there is finite space. But, Mitch, what do you think about both the Kelly lifelong golden wildcard ticket, as well as just the way the wildcard process played out in 2023?
I thought the way you explained it was perfect. I think there's much more than what a lot of people, especially the average viewer, sees in terms of the way we select. And Dave and I have nothing to do with this. It comes down to Jesse, Travis, Renato. These people are the ones that really dive down deep and select these people based off of their merit, first of all, their health, as you explained. And I also think due to what they've contributed to surfing. And that's why Kelly was able to get this wild card right here. And I think the real fact right now is, Dave, that Kelly's getting the wild card because, as you said, he wanted it, which is very surprising to me. But he wants it because he still wants to qualify for the Olympics in Paris 2024. Like, that's his one goal. He just wants to get to Tahiti and have a chance to win an Olympic gold medal. And I can see that happening for sure. But for the first 5 events of next season, he doesn't really have to surf them if he doesn't want to. He might be able to surf pipe and then be like, hey, I'm done. I can do whatever. When it comes to answering the first part of the question, do I think he deserves a golden ticket the whole time? Like Willy Wonka in the Chocolate Factory? Hell no. I don't think anybody does. You could be Andy Irons. You could be Mark Richards. It doesn't guarantee that you're always going to have a space saved for you. We're not in that business. We're not in a business to just give people wild cards whenever they want, whenever they ask for it. No, you have to go out and earn it. And even if he's had 11 world championships, I don't think that at a certain point of the year, he's more deserving than a person that's number 2, number 3 on the Challenger Series rankings. That person's grinding out right now. They're looking to make the championship tour. Kelly's been on tour for 30 years. He could give it a break if he wants, and if he's not fully committed to it either, then he probably doesn't deserve it. The second part of your question, I think that when it comes to the selection of the wildcard process and the way you explained it, it's very important to acknowledge that a lot of these surfers go through very difficult processes, such like Miguel Pupo. He was on the championship tour for 12 years before he finished number 6 in the world, before he won his first event. He was less than 100 points away from qualifying for the Rip Curl WSL finals. But because Kanoe Igarashi did so well in Tahiti last season, he was able to beat him out just by that. So I think, just to clarify, there is a selection process. It goes through a lot of different people, but it mainly comes down to the experienced people in tours and competition. Great first question, by the way. I appreciate it.
Your Miguel point's really good, and we don't know. I appreciate you covering our asses by saying Mitch and Dave don't make the decision. That's exactly what people who make the decision would say, just quietly. No, I'm joking. But Miguel, you pointed out he was on tour for 12 years. He had a really impressive career just in terms of performances, but I do wonder if he'd had a slower year last year, maybe finished in the teens, didn't win his first CT event, if he would get the nod. Maybe not, right? Because it is that balance of the tension of established talent, people performing, and then up and coming talent who are going to kind of shift the paradigm. But in Miguel's case, he's surfing better than he has in his entire career, and the proof is in the results.
100%. And I think out of his generation of surfers, even if there's a 4-year gap between his age and Felipe, that's still the same generation. They qualified around the same time. Yeah. They're definitely great surfers, innovative surfers, progressive. But I think he's kind of the most underrated and the most under-talked out of all of them, too, just because I think he hadn't won a championship tour event, but now he has last year at the Outer Tahiti Pro. Question 2, Dave. It's another great one. And it's a complicated one to answer. We thank you at DanJC264. What would it take for a CT surfer to get a 10 on something other than an air or a barrel?
Ooh, that is a pretty interesting question. I'm interested to get your perspective on this too, Mitch, as a former competitor. It's definitely possible, but my take on it is that it's really venue specific, right? And by that, I mean, at waves like Pipeline and Chopu, unlikely you're going to get a 10 for anything other than a crazy barrel. And then at waves like Super Tubos, Sakurama, beach breaks, unlikely that you're going to get a 10 with anything other than an air or a barrel being a part of your execution on the wave, right? I did, we were talking about this the other day. I was curious about this. So I did have kind of a look back to see if I could find any. And there have been a few, at Bell's Beach, which is, again, probably a venue that lends itself to this. Silvana Lima and Courtney Conlog have had them. A few at Snapper Rocks. Felipe Toledo. He was mixing in some fin ditches into his repertoire, but I don't think that's the same as like one giant punt. Right. I think if the entire kind of like choreography of the wave includes like a fin release here and there, it missed other turns, I think that's probably fair. Lakey Peterson and Stephanie Gilmore, they've also got 10s for turns out at Snapper Rocks. Jeffreys Bay with Jordy and Frederico, where again the repertoire was all turns. Maybe it was like a little shampoo barrel just because they had to on the wave, but it wasn't a proper like through the parking lot kind of like barrel that got them the 10. It was performance based. So I really do think it's possible. I'm actually kind of surprised that John hasn't gotten one at Margaret River yet, just on the strength of his turns. But, what do you think? In 2023, is it still possible to get a 10 that's not based around an air or a barrel?
Well, first of all, I'm glad that you brought John up at Margaret River, because it's just baffling to me. There was one wave, I think 2 years ago. It might have been 2021 when we first went back to Margaret River after COVID. He gets this gnarly barrel, the best barrel I've ever seen at main break, comes out, does a huge layback. 3 judges gave it a 10 and 2 gave it a 9.9. It came out as a 9.93 as the average. I was so just dissatisfied with the score. I was like, why? Like, why? You look at the replay and everything and I can't comprehend it. Either way, that's in the past. It's 2 years ago. It don't matter anymore. It comes down to the venue, as you said. We always send out a text thread every morning with what the judges want to see, especially what the head judge is talking about conditions. It's conditions based, but I can tell you 10s that I've seen at locations that a lot of people wouldn't necessarily think they would have been a 10 at that specific break. John had a 10 at Bell's Beach for one full rotation, I think in 2014, right in front of Gabe actually, but it was a gnarly air, offshore, big section. He had a 10 at Karamas in 2013 for the one big alley-oop. And given there were other 10s by Joel Parkinson, he had a 20-point heat in that event in 2013 by barrels. So it comes down to the conditions of the day, too. Italo was at a 10 at Snapper Rocks for one huge air behind the rock. I personally like to always think of combination of major maneuvers. I think that's what we see most of today. We've seen very few 10s at lower trestles. Obviously, they reserve it because that's the most high-performance wave in the world. But it really does come down to combining everything. If you can get a barrel, a huge turn, and an air on the same wave, that is usually going to come out to an excellent surf score, an 8-point ride or better. But to get a 10, you really have to have a jaw-dropping moment on that wave for the judges to give you something as high as that.
It's a great point.
Should we do question number 3 now, Dave? That we're
let's get into it.
All riled up because this is the most important question out of the 3, I feel. Thank you. At Aiden_Stark Chessa. What is your favorite type of breakfast sandwich?
That's a good question. I'm all fired up to answer it. I mean, I have a specific answer and then a proper answer. Years and years ago, not years and years ago, but 2008, 9, 10, 11, I was going to the J-Bay event and they would do these breakfast rolls, which weren't that complicated, but they had this amazing sauce on them. It was like bacon and like real fine scrambled eggs on a roll with, it was, sweet chili sauce. And it was like really good, but it also could have been that I was exhausted from trying to surf JPA and cold. But so that's one example. But any day of the week, I mean, it's pretty basic. It's just the one I make myself. It's a toasted English muffin or bagel, avocado, scrambled eggs, some pepper, bacon, shredded cheese, and chipotle Tabasco. That's my go-to. Ooh. What about you, Mitch? What's your favorite type of breakfast sandwich?
Well, that sounds pretty good. First of all, I'm getting hungry now.
Come on over. I'll make some.
So I'm going to do a croissant. Ooh. It's going to go grilled cheese on both the bottom and the top. We're going to do ham, avo, onions, a bit of pepper, And then if we could get a little bit of hot sauce right there, some spicy stuff. I'm Mexican. I need a little bit of spice even in the morning. And then you just mash it together. And then you grill it a bit more after that too. We're calling it Mitchell's Special. That's what we're going to call it.
Man, that sounds good. That sounds good. We got to kind of figure out an avenue for our podcast to do like a cooking angle where we just get to eat.
I'm down.
And talk.
I'm super down. And
let's go.
Hey, this is a thing for our fans too. All the listeners of the lineup. Big thank you for sending us your questions too. Send us your food recs as well. I think this is important, and we'll even talk about it on the pod too. What do you think, Dave?
It sounds like a book opportunity to me, right? Where it's just like a crowdsourced, like, what do you eat as a surfer kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'm into it. I'm not the greatest chef, but I can make a couple things. So I'm all for it. But thanks to all of our listeners who wrote in at the Lineup Pod. We really appreciate it. If we didn't get to your question, again, we will answer you in the DMs. We always try to do that. And yeah, Mitch, a lot of fun. Thank you so much. Looking forward to the next one.
Hey, you're going on a trip, by the way. Have fun on your trip. I'm going to sub in for you for a couple episodes. We're going to have some great guests coming up, by the way. But I just want you to go out there and distract yourself from work. Go out and rip, Dave. That's all I ask. Use that CI and bring its purpose to life.
Producer Miguel, you need to bleep out trip and any details about where I'm going when this episode airs. I just want to hear so people are like, what?
Where's he going? Tell us.
That's right. Hunt him down. Right on. Thanks, buddy.